But one of the major problems for those of you that are looking at generic competencies or employability skills is in fact the terminology. The terms that are generally used in Australia are generic competencies, generic skills and employability skills. In contemporary times, the Finn report of the 1990 identified 6 key areas of competence that were employment related. 1992, Mayer built on the work of Finn and identified 7 key competencies, and they broke the competencies into 3 levels. Towards the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s, there was a greater emphasis on employability skills. It also included this idea of personal attributes. Then in 2002 also, Lynn Koski, who was the then Minister for Education in Victoria, added a different language by talking about critical generic skills. Now there is overlap in the lists of each of these. This is not just an Australian phenomenon, it's a phenomenon that's occurred right around the world, and here is a table that talks about the sorts of terms used across a wide range of countries, including the United States, Asia and Scandinavian countries. What Cairns identifies as a common element across all of those skills, the notion that they're basic and fundamental, people-related, conceptual skills, personal skills and attributes, skills related to the business world and skills related to communities. So the question becomes, well, how does one go about assessing these generic skills, competencies and employability skills? And this table talks about 4 different assessment models. The inferred model, where evidence is inferred from performance. So in other words, as a teacher, you watch what students are doing, and in an informal way, you're evaluating, you're assessing people's ability to display certain skills. There's the parallel approach. Generic skills and competencies are actually taught quite separately from the task skills or technical skills. There's then the model of separate tasks where the assessment tasks themselves are separate. So in the second example, the parallel, what you've got is teaching of key competencies separate from the discipline of vocational skills. But the key competencies are still assessed within the context of students or participants going about their vocational training. In the third one, where you've got separated tasks, you've actually got complete separation of the assessment of generic skills from discipline-based skills. And then you've got this integrated approach where it's all integrated into one and there's inferences drawn across whole groups of subjects. A way of summarising that is, depending on the model, there's a greater level of judgment, subjectivity, and there's greater or lesser levels of integration of the generic skills or competencies. So there are a number of issues around assessment. Firstly, there's this whole issue of a lack of consistency about what they mean. Are there different levels of generic competency? Can you actually describe levels at which that competency is demonstrated? How do they link with qualification levels? Are they transferable? Should you teach and assess them in an integrated or a discrete way? And should the assessment be holistic or individualised? And who's responsible for this anyway? Now, this is one approach, which is a validated self-assessment approach, which has been adopted at Torrens Valley TAFE in South Australia. It was developed by Rob Denton. The key elements of this integrated self-assessment is it is a self-assessment. Students effectively assess themselves and then it's validated at a later time. It's integrated into course and work activities rather than being something separate or on top of. So if you're doing a Certificate 2 in electronics, that's what you're doing. And if you wish to, you can also self-evaluate your generic skills. They have very clear criteria for their assessment, and it is at 3 levels. And effectively, the student develops a portfolio of evidence, which is then validated by the teaching staff. And to get formal recognition of a particular generic skill, there's got to be demonstration of achievement of that generic skill or competency on at least 2 occasions. So this is their model. The student identifies a suitable activity to develop to demonstrate a key competency. Collect the appropriate validation self-assessment sheet. There are self-assessment sheets which clearly say what the criteria you have to meet are. And it's the student's responsibility, encouraged by the lecturers or the teachers, to actually engage in this activity. The learner then nominates the performance level that they think that they want to be to evaluate it. They reflect on the criteria and they reflect on the activity that they've been engaged in, and then they collect samples of evidence that might be useful in a portfolio. It might be a worksheet or a photograph. So level 1 is the ability to follow guidelines to achieve a set of goals. Level 2 is about choosing from a range of strategies and resources to achieve the best possible result. And level 3 is to create new strategies.